Really grateful for you all being here to discuss some really important topics. Before we get into today's discussion, I want to just give you a brief intro to myself. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Andrew Murphy. I'm a third-year law student at George Washington University, and I'll be the moderator for today's event. Before we get into panelist introductions, I'd just like to give you a brief overview of this webinar series for those of you who may not be familiar with it. The Animal Law program at GW Law has established the Animal Legal Education Initiative, which strives to incorporate animal law as a standalone discipline within the legal academy. This webinar series is intended to support those efforts by creating opportunities for adjunct professors across the country to connect and collaborate with one another. We also hope to provide you with all the academic resources and a support system that you need so that you can accomplish your goals within your own institutions. These webinars are truly intended to be conversational and a place in which we can all network. To that end, please feel free to send questions and comments in the chat or unmute yourself if at any point you have a question. I will also reserve some time at the end for questions. We also encourage you all to turn on your video if you're able and comfortable doing so, as it's always great to be able to put names to faces. Finally, I also wanted to mention that if you've missed any of our previous webinars, the recordings of those are up on the GW Law website. So feel free to check those out if you'd like. Also, today's event is being recorded and will be made available at the same place. Moving on to today's webinar, we'll be discussing how to enhance animal law engagement. We have a wonderful panel today, and I'd like to turn it over to them so they can give a brief introduction of themselves. Priscilla, would you maybe like to start and popcorn it on?
Sure. Thank you so much, Andrew, and thank you so much to everyone attending today. My name is Priscilla Rader Culp. I'm the Senior Law School Programs Attorney at the Animal Legal Defense Fund, which is a national organization dedicated to protecting the lives and advancing the interests of animals through the legal system. As part of my role, I work closely with law students and law schools and law professors like all of you. And I help facilitate our course grants, our academic outreach resources, student chapters, student conventions, scholarships, pretty much any way that the ALDF might be able to help law professors and students in their journeys to succeed and stay in the movement and thrive within it. We try to figure out ways that we can help and show up for you. So do reach out if you are looking for course grants or other assistance. And I am also very delighted to be part of the Council on Animal Legal Education. It's been a really, really wonderful time and happy to discuss anything and everything with all of you today. And I am going to pick on Conley.
All right. Thanks, Priscilla. Hi, everybody. Very happy to be here. My name is Conley Wouters. I'm an assistant professor of law at the University of Illinois Chicago School of Law. I'm teaching animal law here for the first time ever. It's been very fun. In fact, it reminds me I only have 2 sessions left, which I'm very bummed about. I also teach contracts and legal writing. So yeah, I'm at a school where there really wasn't an animal law presence for 10 years. So I think this panel is perfect for me. I can speak to the real effort to trying to enhance engagement. I also think I have a lot to learn about it. So yeah, I'm happy to be here. Also very happy to be working with the council. This has been great, and I'm looking forward to another good discussion.
And I will add, because I'm very new to having this title, but I'm also teaching for the first time. I'm co-teaching with David Rosengard, my colleague with the Animal Legal Defense Fund, and we're at Lewis and Clark Law teaching advanced animal law. So we have veterinarians and LLM students and master's students. So it's been really worthwhile. Very new to me to say that. So just chiming in. And Becca, on to you. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Priscilla. Hi, everyone. I'm Rebecca Carey. I am the managing attorney for farm animals at the Humane Society of the United States, where I've been since 2010. So pretty much my whole legal career. I've only recently started getting into teaching and have really enjoyed it so far. I'm currently teaching a course, an animal law course at George Mason in Virginia. I've also previously taught one at GW, which has been kind enough to host this. And I also, in my spare time, I'm the co-chair of the DC Bar Animal Law Committee. And so I think one of the things that I can sort of speak to today is some of the sort of cross-pollination of all of those things, my animal law work, my animal law teaching, and activities on the committee. Thanks for being here.
Thank you all for your introductions. So I wanted to start off by talking a little bit about animal law events. Priscilla, you mentioned you're at ALDF. Actually, one of the ways that I first got involved in animal law was, I think, the first event that I went to as a first-year law student. It was a SALDF event. It was, I think that they had like a vegan pizza night or something like that. And they just got together to chat and to talk about animal law issues and how, new students could get involved. And it was really awesome how welcoming everybody was. And it was great to hear about the cool projects that people were doing at GW. And it made me want to get involved as well. And I know that, lots of different schools have SALDF and other type of animal welfare student organizations and groups. So I guess my first question was, I was wondering, what are some events that SALDF or animal welfare organization, student organizations working with professors can help to host in order to promote and to enhance animal law engagement?
Yeah, great question, Andrew. And yeah, we have about 100 or so active student chapters across the country. We're very proud of all of this wonderful students. They do amazing, amazing things, socially in their communities, legal work, pro bono services, fundraising, just education, just you name it, they're doing it. So this is not by any means an exhaustive list, but some of the more common ones that I've seen student chapters do with professors is like lunch and learn. So bringing in, professors to so one chapter did this cool thing where they had for a semester a professor speaking series where they worked with faculty and it was a bunch of 1L professors mostly, and it was how their topics, so property contracts, whatever it might be, con law, and they would do brown bag lunch for an hour and just talk about the ways that animals and animal issues, animal topics, animal law fits within the 1L, class structure that everyone is kind of already familiar with. And then they had some others, environmental, wildlife, some other, upper level classes too, with professors diving into that. So that was a really fun way to get faculty involved and to showcase the ways that animal law intersects with others and how it's paralleled to so many different areas. We also have student chapters, bringing in experts all the time, but we doing like individual speakers, but we also have ones that plan, full on symposiums or panels, and they work with other groups, maybe other classes. So getting involvement with the community that way. I'm going to pass it over to some other panelists to see if they have other ideas. I could seriously go on and on. So those are the two that I think really stand out. I'm sure I'll chime in more.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you, Priscilla. And now I'm going to email all my colleagues tonight and tell them they're doing a lunch and learn. Or actually, I'm going to email the SALDF students and have them email them. That's a great idea. So I just wanted to chime in really quickly here. So the SALDF, I'm ending my second year at this school, and the SALDF chapter just started up this year, so they're new. It's been wonderful, but one thing I just wanted to suggest from the perspective of faculty advisor is I take a very hands-off approach. I mean, I've never been a faculty advisor to a student group because I was doing like visiting jobs before this. And so I didn't really know what that meant. I try to make it as sort of like the student directed as possible. So just anything. I mean, to the extent that they have questions or need logistics, they're usually reaching out to ALDF because they have all of the support, supplies, resources, etc., including just ideas for events. They know I'm here, they know I'm available. I'm happy to brainstorm with them, but that's just something I wanted to add. So like I was thinking of one example, and I know we're going to talk about speakers separately, but one of our students, great, very active animal law student, many of you know her, I think. She's involved in SALDF, and she got our first speaker, or I should say their first speaker, who was amazing. Dr. Emily Trennell from PETA gave a talk in person, and that was all thanks to the student like knowing someone who knew her. So I think just really encouraging students to take advantage of their connections. It can also be a sort of like good networking exercise for them as well.
Yeah, and the only thing I'll add to this question in particular is that it's an idea that I'm sort of borrowing from a colleague who recently did it. I think that at where there are student chapters of SALDF or other kind of related organizations, especially if they're newer, one idea might be to sort of invite specifically animal law practitioners from your community into sort of a specific lunch and learn or maybe even evening event that sort of relates to what do animal lawyers even do. The one that this colleague of mine recently did was extremely well attended, partially because it was well publicized and sort of cross-posted to other student groups. And they had a real emphasis on sort of the different creative sort of ways that animal law gets at so many different areas of law, as those who are practicing or teaching it already know really well. And I think that sort of helped spark student interest in that chapter specifically, which has been struggling for a while and looking for ways to sort of grow their numbers.
Thank you all for those thoughts. I attended one great event at GW that was done in tandem with the DC bar, the animal law section of the DC bar. Um, have any of you ever worked with bar organizations to help plan events?
So I haven't, but one thing that I'm sure other bar animal law committees do, that I know the Illinois one does, is a newsletter, and it's like it's quarterly or something, and they're very like great about soliciting student input. I've had students work on that, but not like SALDF specific. So I think that could be another opportunity, like just getting like two of them to collaborate on an article, whether there or somewhere else, and then kind of making that an ongoing thing.
Yeah, and this is cheating a little since I helped put on the event that Andrew is talking about. But yeah, I think that coordinating events with your sort of local chapter of if your local if whatever city you live in has an animal law section of your bar, that can be a really great way to both come up with speakers either for your class or for sort of events for the bar group, or events like this one that we had at GW recently, where it was sort of co-hosted by GW and the DC Bar Animal Law Committee. But I at least tried to sort of emphasize getting a lot of students there, either from my classes or from others that I sort of knew about through my work in these various spheres. And I think that the kinds of conversations that can develop when you've got people from all of those sort of different intersecting parts of animal law can be really great. A lot of the times they can have, long practitioners who have been practicing this stuff for a long time and newer students who are just getting into it. people from the field that, there's a lot of sort of introductions and networking opportunities that occur there that I find really fun.
Yeah, thank you. And you weren't cheating on at all on that one. I hoped to tee you up because it was a great event. Um, so, aside from events,
Sorry,
bringing,
one
oh
thing.
yeah, of course.
Sorry, I'm so sorry. I'm gonna pop in the chat a list that the ALDF put together. That's a list of all of the bar associations and committees. You can use that to find yours, and if yours isn't on there, let us know. But I did, just as a quick reference, it's a really handy dandy page. Sorry about that, Andrew.
No, no worries at all. And thanks. That's an awesome resource. So when you're bringing in speakers, not necessarily to events, but into the classroom, to chat about a specific issue or to help lecture, what are the considerations that you make when you're inviting somebody in, potentially regarding the scope of the conversation, the guidance that you give to speakers, things like that?
I can start that one. I actually, not to harp too much on this event we just did at GW, but building on that event, I actually invited a couple of the speakers from that to the animal law class that I'm teaching to come in this week. And I mentioned that because I think for the event at the law school, one of the things we really strive to do is sort of have, to the extent that we can, some really like balanced views on a panel. I'm not saying that you shouldn't also think about the possibility of doing that in a classroom as well. But given that I had some sort of more specific student learning goals of having some of these speakers come into the classroom, I sort of tailored sort of who I was inviting accordingly. Um, but yeah, I think in general, thinking about, especially if you're going to be having multiple guest speakers, thinking about things like diversity of opinions and of backgrounds, and also sort of what a guest speaker can bring to your classroom that you're not otherwise doing. Um, I think it in sort of in my line of work, since I work with a lot of other animal attorneys, it could be really easy to bring other people in that I work with, many of whom have very similar views to me because we sort of tend to approach animal law issues a similar way. But I think, students at the end of the semester might be a little tired of hearing from you and hearing your views, and it can be good to shake things up a little and bring in somebody with a very different background or who, practices in a different way. And then I'd also just add, thinking about what your students have sort of shown the most interest in during a semester. If you have the luxury of sort of not needing to plan speakers way in advance and being able to sort of maybe think about bringing them in a little bit later in the semester. We'll see how that goes actually this time, because it's sort of my first time waiting this long to figure that out. But these particular group of students are very interested in some certain types of companion animal issues. So it turned out to work out really well that I'm bringing in speakers that are going to be talking about some pressing companion animal issues in the district and beyond.
I can jump in really quick. Yeah, I think I second all of what Becca said. I mean, I think about this point too, like the sort of diversity of perspectives, and it's hard, right? Because we all work in one way or another in the animal protection movement. But I think particularly when you're in the classroom, it's really essential to try to do that for a lot of reasons, but mainly pedagogical, right? Whenever I'm teaching this material, I'm trying to teach the material and keep my own opinions, perspectives, ideologies out of it, just as I do when I teach contracts or whatever. So I think that's important. And I was thinking while you were talking, Becca, about like, okay, how have I tried to do that even when the work, right, the experience of speakers isn't necessarily all that diverse? And I think one way to do it is like experience. So I've had some speakers, or will have some speakers, who have been animal lawyers for decades and have done some really groundbreaking work, worked on huge cases, which is amazing educational opportunity, obviously. But I also brought in a very recent law school graduate who's sort of at the beginning of her career and like transitioning into a career in animal law. And that was awesome, right? Like the students love that because they can really identify with her. She just took the bar. So there's, a lot of kind of like practical knowledge there as well. And then I think, Andrew, one more thing you mentioned, like how much guidance to give speakers. I tend to do this on a very like case-by-case basis because I want them to feel comfortable, right, with that. So I just ask them. It's varied quite a bit. I had a prosecutor come in and he like had a presentation that he often gave to CLEs, bar associations or whatever. The new attorney I mentioned, she and I do pro bono work together, so it was a very limited scope where she just talked about a case we're working on. And then, some of the lawyers who've been doing this for a long time, I'm like, I'm happy to give you something like based on the topic we're doing that week, or you could just go, right? Because they could talk about anything. So I think I'm glad you asked. It's a really important question. And I think it's something you need to have a good sense of, like, obviously before they come in.
Yeah, and just to quickly add, agree with everything, and also looking at the authors of articles you might assign and seeing if you are able to invite them. We did that with one of ours. Kat Kelly wrote a fantastic article. We're like, hey, why don't you come in and talk about it? So that was a really great experience, I think, for students to be able to ask directly to the author of the paper. And yeah, prepping them, I think it really, like Conley says, it really depends on what you want out of it. If it is a narrow scope, let them know, because sometimes, they'll just go for it. So if there is something specific, definitely let them know, feel comfortable doing that. I think that there's different levels of hand holding. So like if you have a newer grad, who's starting off, maybe offer them some talking points to consider, maybe some questions or a vibe of your class, so they have a better sense of it. Whereas, if you have like Kathy or someone, you just wind her up and let her go. She can talk about anything and everything. So knowing who you're asking and what you're asking of them and what their comfort levels are. But I think bringing in speakers, if you can't bring in like a live speaker, having a recording of them, being able to ask them questions and bring those questions back or answers back to the class is also helpful. So other ways to add perspectives if it's not only through a live speaker.
Yeah.
So could I just add one more real quick logistical concern that a colleague in another school mentioned this recently, and I think it's a really important point, especially because like my animal law class is only 2 credits. So that makes it hard to fit in everything that I want to as it is. And I get so excited about bringing in speakers and experts because like, I want students to hear from them, but then it's, they usually talk for an hour and that's an hour of 2 hours. So I think that's one thing that I didn't really think about as much as I should have, how that affects your planning with, what's actually on the syllabus. It can be challenging sometimes.
Yeah, thank you all for sharing that. Priscilla, one thing that you mentioned, I've been in a few classes in which professors have assigned reading material and then they invite the person in who wrote that material. And it's a really cool experience, to be able to ask them firsthand about what they've been doing. Um, do you all oftentimes try to, I guess, cater the reading material in order to prep students for guest speakers, or do you invite guest speakers to help choose certain types of materials to have students read ahead of time?
Fantastic question, and yes to both. I think the more context you can give your students so they can be best prepared to show up and be engaged and show the speaker how brilliant they are and how wonderful your class is and have really good questions. And then also for the speaker, we don't know everything that exists out there. So the speaker might have a really great article that they wrote or someone they wrote or maybe even they know of a short film or some sort of content that they could add. So I always recommend asking your speaker if they have any materials that they want to add. Anything that they really want the students to know, any prep, if they're going to talk about a case and they have that case they can share, I'm definitely adding that to an assignment. But yeah, anytime you're able to give prep materials for the students to read so that they can show up best prepared. I mean, that makes you look good. It makes them look good. It makes the speaker feel like, their time is well spent. So great points, Andrew.
And bridging something that Priscilla just said with sort of part of what Conley said a moment ago, I think one thing that's worked well for me in terms of building in some time for guest speakers, if that's indeed something you want to do in your class, and not having it sort of overwhelm. Can people still hear me? Everybody just froze for me.
Yeah, we can still hear you.
Okay. Sorry, everyone froze, and I was very confused. One thing that that I've found has worked well is leaving one class of the semester as a sort of hot topics class towards the end, and you don't necessarily then have to sort of fill in all the details right away. If it's towards the end, it gives you time to figure out what guest speaker you might want to have come in, what reading materials might correlate with that guest speaker, and to even ask them, as Priscilla sort of said, what they're working on or what they might want to be talking about that the students could read. So that's what we've sort of done for the class that I mentioned that's happening tomorrow, actually, is have the students, they for a long time, they knew on the syllabus that this is the week we're doing a hot topic. They didn't know what it was. Once we secured the guest speakers a couple of weeks ago, we let them know that and said that reading would be, sort of assigned closer to class. And then about a week and a half ago, once we had talked to the speakers, we ended up assigning a couple of articles that one of them they had partially authored, and one that were just sort of very related to what they're going to be talking about. And that way it's sort of like a bit limited in scope, but also focused in, and it gives you some time to think about it in your semester.
So to go back to just overall events, I mean, I imagine that well-attended events lead to well-attended classes. Um, how do you go about advertising events to students, and how have you I guess we mentioned earlier associating with bar associations, but are there any other strategies that you use to bring as many people as you can to your events?
Yeah, so first off, ALDF has an events page, so you can add any and all events to that. So I will find that link and pop it in the chat whenever I'm able to. And we also I'd recommend connecting with your student chapter. They most likely, or they better, and if not, they don't have an Instagram or some sort of social media, convince them to make one, but they should have one. You could put events there. We also just launched like 2 months ago our student chapter website, and that allows for every single student chapter. They have their own account with us now, and they're able to add, thank you, Kathy. She just added it to the chat. So student chapters are able to log in and add events to the calendar, and it can show up for everyone or just their chapter, depending on the openness of the event. So those are really great ways. Definitely getting like a flyer made as someone who runs the Instagram for the student chapter one, making sure that there's a flyer that fits the social media pixel guidelines. It's such a silly thing to do, but like it really does matter to make that look clean, professional, and you can just share it with everyone and everyone can cross post it. That's super helpful. If there is any way to, like, if the topic in any way, covers other areas like we've discussed, definitely reach out to the student groups on those topics, see if they want to, get involved. ALDF, if it's part of like a student chapter event, they can apply for a project grant to help cover food and everything. So you could put free food on that flyer, which also really helps for getting attendance. Anything else? Yeah.
I feel like you just hit all of them, like bam, bam, bam.
Yeah, there's a lot of ways out there, and you can email me too, and I'll post it on Instagram, whatever. We're very, very eager to get these events out there. Yeah, share with your animal law bar sections. If you have any firms that you work with, ask them. Maybe they have people they want to attend. Doing network events too can make it so people have like a social area, like a way to socially connect so that they are more inclined to attend events later on. So some sort of network or so like lunch social or something, can make it fun too.
And it occurs to me the only thing I'd add there is that not everybody's in a city where there maybe are where of a lot of student animal law groups. So obviously Priscilla mentioned you can reach out to her, reach out to ALDF, but another way is to just sort of tackle it by talking to somebody at the law schools near you, yours and schools that are nearby. Just emailing um, uh, a couple of the offices there to just be like, hey, do you happen to have a group like this? We'd love to involve students in some events we're doing. And I've found that that's been useful in a couple of cities I've lived in.
Yeah, thank you. Those are all fantastic ideas. Are there any, I guess, logistical things that are easy to miss when planning events? Have you ever missed any logistical things?
I could just go down the whole whatever logistical things there are you can miss. I've missed them, so I won't go through the whole. No, I think just generally for me, as someone new to the event plan, right? So we've had animal law programming this semester, and it's actually gone amazingly because of the students and because of our marketing team here. But I guess I would say I didn't miss anything, but I would have started planning earlier than I did, as early as possible. Because there's just so many things I don't think of, like the food or like the room or like the timing. Like, is there a class in the room after we do the event, right? Like all that stuff is just like stuff I've never thought about at work because I'm a teacher. And now all of a sudden it's like it's really, really important to making these things happen. So yeah, I would just say give yourself as much runway as possible and rely on people who are better than you. That's been my strategy.
So have an assistant is what Conley's saying.
I don't have one, but yes, do have an assistant. Yeah.
Yeah, with that said, one trick that I've learned and have kept with event planning is work from the date of the event itself and work backwards. And that way you can make sure that you're kind of covering it's a little bit easier to not miss things that way. But yeah, making sure, who do you talk to reserve a room? How do you secure lunch? Who's going to pick up lunch if it's off campus? So many little things like that, making sure, you're starting promo early. I would at least give it a few weeks, at least 2 weeks promo, but ideally, a month or more. Things move pretty quickly in law school and schedules fill up quickly. Yeah, I think you covered a lot of it, Conley. As far as logistics, I also will jump in that like outside of just speakers, there's also been like field trips and other things that like add another layer of logistics, like carpooling and uh, groups and where and how and when and all of it and arranging it with the sanctuary or with the shelter. So definitely just try to reverse engineer and work backwards. And I mean, you'll live, you learn. You could also definitely reach out to other faculty who have experience in planning events. One thing that I was chatting with Conley and Becca during planning is working with your student chapter on, or the SBA even, of putting together, if your school doesn't have one, like a cheat sheet of who to go to in your school for catering, for room, for room reservation, for parking passes, whatever it might be. That could be really helpful, because like Conley said, teachers, we're not really thinking about how to plan things, but it is really important to make these seamless.
Yeah, thank you all. I hate to add another logistic, but I identify with Conley in that I very easily forget things. But one thing as a from a student perspective is I think it's important to try and to take into consideration other events that are going on at the law school, as well as class schedules that are common for students. Especially if some students are enrolled in very large, 1 to 200 person classes at some law schools. And it's important to try and avoid those time periods if you want to bring in the biggest attendance possible.
Absolutely. Know your academic calendar, have it bookmarked, check it every time you want to plan something, make sure that there's not like an event that's going to definitely be more popular than yours. Yeah, definitely check the calendars out. Great point. Sure.
Yeah, thank you. So I I wanted to move on. I guess, animal law and policy is always changing. And like a lot of other things in the world, it's sometimes political. Um, I guess I was wondering, does the current political climate influence what speakers you consider bringing into classes and to events? And if so, how?
So as a new teacher, I'm really figuring this out, and to try to figure it out right now in this climate is additionally interesting. It's weird times out there. I, haven't really received any guidance or guidelines or anything. So I'm kind of the mind of, you ask for forgiveness, not permission. So I'm not really, we haven't really changed anything too much. I think if anything, it sort of pushes us to consider speakers that are kind of pushing some of the boundaries, or aren't being recognized as much. If their voices are being oppressed, then it is almost like a inclination to highlight them, to amplify them. I don't know if others, since I am so new in it, if others have more to say with it. I haven't really seen a change yet. I really hope I don't. But I also think that I'm very fortunate because I teach in Portland, Oregon, and we have a lot of state protection and community support. So
Yeah, it hasn't come up for me yet, but it's certainly something, the I think almost nobody's work is untouched by by this current political climate. And so I do think that um, in the next several years, as people are thinking about teaching animal law classes, there's going to be sort of continued opportunities to put on events and bring in guest speakers that have to do with sort of you know what's changed in this administration versus the last one, specifically what's changed in terms of the fight for animals, right? And I don't think that necessarily has to be a sort of controversial, eyebrow raising, is your administration going to have questions kind of event. It just is sort of also, I mean, in some places it might be, but I also just think there's a lot of good opportunities here for people who are doing animal law work in their day jobs to talk to students about how the sort of how their offensive docket has changed, what they're doing that's different now than in past years, how they're organizing differently, et cetera. And that can provide a lot of probably really good learning opportunities for students who are going to continue to be in ever shifting political landscapes as well.
Yeah, I can just add to that. I mean, this sort of goes on a point that both Priscilla and Becca mentioned. It hasn't affected my who I've asked to speak, but like Priscilla, I'm brand new. But it has created like interesting moments of conversation. So like I mentioned, Emily Trennell from PETA, she gave a talk about animal research and the transition to non-animal research models. And so a student asked a question because I think it was shortly after the State of the Union address, and Trump had mentioned something about transgender mice, right? About taxpayer waste for like all this, and so there's this like weird confluence of the right wanting to defund NIH, but the effect being is it going to be harder to experiment on animals? And so like my students were really interested in that. It was a great question because Emily like had the scientific knowledge to be like, well, no, here's what it's like. I'm going to mess up the word, but it's not transgender, it's like transgenics, I think, right? And so she was able to break that down, to clarify it, to tell them what it was actually about. And sort of like she was really keyed into the sort of the conversations in the animal protection community, specifically with respect to animal research, and what's happening like in Congress on the right, with what we're all seeing on the news, the defunding stuff. So I think, I didn't plan that, but I do think it kind of goes to Becca's point, like being open to these moments, and trying to leverage what we can, right, and make them positive learning experiences, because so much of it can easily just slip into like dread, and unproductive uncertainty, understandably. So yeah, that's been really my only experience with it.
If I can just add a couple thoughts. So I do think one of the things Priscilla said I want to highlight, that it matters what school you're at. Right? So the culture of each school is going to be more or less risk averse and more or less supportive. And that's going to continue to evolve over these next months, right, and years. And so for instance, we're at GW is on the list of schools to be investigated, right, by the congressional committee. And so I think it's prudent, right, to be thinking about this in a number of ways. So I support what everyone has already said. I think there's lots of opportunities to think about what does animal law mean and how does it evolve under this new administration, and what does it mean to be having these conversations in a law school environment where the law schools themselves are under threat. And so that is going to be an evolving conversation. And to the degree that animal law issues are put under this sort of general umbrella of like woke or DEI, right? They can put a target on the school's back, if you will. And so it is something I think to be aware of. It doesn't mean that we don't do this work, right? But I think maybe some conversations. So I definitely I totally understand that sort of forgiveness rather than permission perspective. But I do think it might be helpful for adjuncts in particular who are even more marginalized and less secure, if there's a way to get a sense from someone you trust at the institution. Some connection, like this is what I'm like, is there anything I should know about, right? Or this is what I'm planning, and just kind of touch base so that you protect yourself. And that hopefully leads to a more successful event, right? That there aren't these other hidden barriers that you don't know about, or hidden resistance that you might run into from the school. And I think this is going to end up being, really important ongoing conversation. So I think it falls into sort of two categories. So what is it that we're doing? How are we doing it? Who are we inviting, right? How balanced our panels are? All those kinds of conversations are going to be more acute than they used to be. And I think the fundamental conversation about why are we even talking about animal law when there's so many other important things to be talking about. We see this periodically when there's lots of political foment or, lots of other crises within the legal world and more generally in society to deal with. And I think going back to Conley's point, it's always relevant. There's always intersectional relevance that I think we can uplift and help people learn about. And so it's a useful thought about how to position these conversations so that people, so we're sort of answering that question without necessarily bringing it up, right? So that we can help people understand why these conversations are important, because animal law in the past, advocates have been maligned, maybe, right, for talking about things that are not important and being insensitive to the needs of other communities who are being attacked and who need a lot of support. So I think being aware of that conversation and thinking about how it's evolving in terms of how we're managing the conversations that we're choosing to have, right? Because this is an opportunity for us to bring people on campus and for us to decide which conversations we think are important. And so that is a choice we're making. And so to do it with an eye to those factors, I think is important. And it's challenging, I think, for adjuncts to know what the political climate at a school is, right? How supportive it is, because you tend just not to be involved in those conversations. And even some faculty aren't really having these conversations or aware of the administrative positioning or posturing in their own schools. So as the attacks on the legal academy and the attacks on lawyers in particular, and who lawyers are representing and the causes they're taking on continue to evolve under this administration, these conversations will be a little more fraught and will take a little bit more, I think, intentional consideration. And the nice thing is that we have this community, right, to bounce ideas off of and get support from. So that's something that we want to sort of offer as people are navigating these decisions, right? You're not alone, and you have people that you can rely on and ask for support, especially if you feel like you're getting into a moment of difficulty with your university, right? There are folks who can come and support you before things get to be problematic.
Yeah, can I just add something really quickly to that? That's very helpful, Kathy. Thank you. Just like one more layer of confusion as a new faculty member in this, right? So I feel like I do have a good sense of the law school. I feel like the faculty there's a good deal of solidarity here, and we're all kind of on the same page. I have no idea what's going on in the university, right? So like the UIC is an R1. I don't know how much federal funding they get, but I'm sure there are like very diverse perspectives on this stuff. And I don't know if the university has our back, or if they would, if we need it, or whatever. So just another thing to consider. I heard a colleague at another school say like, well, I don't want to be responsible for getting my colleagues in the political science department like on a list or defunded, or right. So yeah, it's tricky.
Yeah, and I think that is not always visible, right? Because the law schools tend to be somewhat separate from the main campuses in terms of administrative decision making. At GW, I've been more aware of it because it's been in the news, right? And so when you have congressional delegations visit your main campus, then we're asking questions about what they're doing. I will share with you that I do know that law schools and universities across the country after the Harvard decision have been meeting, have committees to decide, and sorry, the sunlight is sort of in my face in a weird way, to decide what it is they need to do to be in compliance with the recent Supreme Court case, which is different than the recent executive order, right, which haven't necessarily been found to be constitutional or authoritative just yet. So, but rest assured that there are committees talking about that on every campus, right? And law schools to some degree are advising their own universities about this because that's a wealth of legal knowledge and perspective. But it doesn't answer the question about how those universities are going to be deciding the questions and how risk averse. And as you've seen, different universities have decided to sort of capitulate to pressure, and some have resisted. And again, that we're just in the first, weeks basically of response, and the academic community as a whole hasn't kind of coalesced, right, around a response. And that may change. I hope that it does, but it will continue to evolve. And so it's, really useful to think about. And frankly, I think I've said in other webinars, the fact that I have she, her on my Zoom name, right, is something that I thought about because I don't necessarily want that to put my colleagues at risk or my university further in the crosshairs. and yet I don't want to pre-capitulate, right? And so it's something I have to kind of keep thinking about.
Yeah, Ken.
Hi. Just one thing with that I'd like to add too is always be aware what industry you're talking about, whether it's farming or veterinarian, and you never know when you're going to say something or teach something or have somebody repeat something that took place that may rub up against that industry, and whether or not that industry also has political connections and aspirations to the right or left, or to the whoever's in power, whether it's at the state or federal level. So it's always something to consider as well.
Yeah, and I'll add to that there are organizations that send people to events to monitor them, right? Often it's been the larger animal law conferences, but it's super easy, right, for anyone to attend any of these events. They're open, and it's there were days when I didn't realize that students were recording in my classroom, and that's something to just be aware of, right? So I actually had a student years and years ago from the Federalist Society who took my class so that he could report on what we were doing to his Federalist Society colleagues. It was a clinic class, and there was nothing bad to report from my perspective, so it was fine. But it shocked me, right, that was what was going on. But it was an early lesson for me in how I conduct myself, and that is, I say what I say, and I don't say anything I wouldn't want to be known publicly. There are a few times I'll say, like between us or in a classroom, especially when I'm trying to make this space safer for the students to share things they might not be comfortable with. But for me, yeah, I feel like I have to be aware that there are different perspectives, different people in the audience, right? And they're going to hear things differently than maybe I mean them. And so it is a really good reminder, right, that we're not just talking to people who agree with us. We're talking to anybody.
Yeah, thank you for that point, Ken, and thank you for all of the thoughts from all the panelists and Dean Hessler. I guess I just wanted to make sure that everybody's aware that they can ask questions and add comments and open it up to more questions.
I'll comment if I may. My name is Marcy Lahart. I have practiced animal law for someplace between 25 and 30 years. I am not teaching animal law right now, although I did teach it for a couple semesters at the University of Miami when I was living in South Florida. And I really miss it because it's so much more fun to stand up in front of a room of students who think you're brilliant than stand up in front of judges who all seem to think I'm a moron. I got time off for good behavior and have left Florida and moved back to the Pacific Northwest, which is where I went to law school. I'm now in Tacoma, Washington. I'm also very enamored of the sound of my own voice, and I seldom turn down invitations to speak. The topics that I speak about most often are assistance animals. I do a lot of litigation under the Fair Housing Act and the ADA, and also defending dangerous dogs or allegedly dangerous dogs using the Constitution. So if anybody would like a guest lecture on those topics, please let me know. And also, if anybody is aware of an opportunity to teach in the Pacific Northwest to Washington, I'd love to hear about it.
Yeah, thanks. I'll definitely be in touch, possibly with some ideas. Thanks.
Ken, I think you had your hand up too.
Yes, I was just going to ask Rebecca about you seem to have a career in animal law and are doing teaching in animal law, and how you balance that and how you find that.
Yeah, you picked a good week to ask me that because right before this started, I was just saying we're getting ready to file a big Supreme Court brief actually this week. So balancing that with getting students' thoughts back on their outlines for their papers and a number of other competing things, it can be tricky. The way that the honest answer at how I balance it at the moment is I'm only teaching one class a year, pretty much one semester a year. Um, and so I sort of know that for a period of several months, things are going to be a little bit more hectic and a little busier. And then they will be a little less so. It's just always unfortunate, of course, when everything on your calendar blows up at once. But that could be true no matter how many other different types of competing priorities I had. So I also just really enjoy it. Like I'm the more that I do it, and I haven't done it that much, but the more that I do it, the more I'm really enjoying being able to sort of think on my feet a little bit more, bring some things in from my office life that I'm able to sort of share with the students on sort of real world examples of how, how a case that they're reading about actually transpired, if it was one that I was a part of, or sort of bringing in some other sort of relevant practice experience into things we're reading. And students, I find, really tend to like perk up at those parts of the conversations too, when it's not just sort of what were the facts and what was the standing theory and what was the ultimate decision, but like, oh yeah, and here's one interesting to think about when you're advocating for your client that you might not have thought about, or here's this really interesting way that you can use amicus briefs or whatever it might be. So yeah, I appreciate the question because I think a lot of us in this field, in whatever capacity, we're like passionate people who are overextended in a lot of ways in our lives. But yeah, I think I also like get a lot from doing it, and that's been really rewarding.
Any more questions?
I have a story about an animal law class nightmare. We were talking earlier about logistics. I was teaching at the University of Miami, and the first time that I taught the course about the Church of the Lumakai Babalu versus the city of Hialeah, I looked up who the attorneys were on the case, and I discovered that the attorney that represented the city of Hialeah still lives and practices in Miami. And I called him and said, hey, I'm teaching this animal law class. Love to hear your perspective on this case. And he came and he gave a really great talk. Sort of the inside scoop that nobody would ever know if they hadn't been litigating the case. And so when I taught that class the next year, he wasn't available. So I thought, hey, I'll reach out to the other side. And I reached out to the High Reverend of the church. I can't remember what his title was, but I personally would like to understand their perspective, and I thought my students would enjoy that too. I neglected to tell him where to park because I thought he was a grown adult man who had lived in Miami and probably knew the lay of the land. So he ended up showing up like an hour and 45 minutes late to a 2-hour class. And I had not really been prepared to teach because I thought I was going to have this guest lecturer. So I had to wing it. And he managed to offend one of my students so much within the first 3 minutes of opening his mouth that she left. So that was a failed experiment. It just lessons to live by.
Well, it's good to learn. Good to learn from that. And what a creative idea to look at the people, the attorneys in a case, and you contact them like that. That's really awesome. I think that we're at about time. So I just wanted to thank everybody for for joining us today, and huge thanks to our panelists for coming in a busy time for you all. We hope that you all enjoyed the webinar. This is the last webinar of this series, but GW will be hosting a day-long pedagogy workshop for adjunct professors on June 6th. And feel free to reach out to Dean Kathy Hessler if you're interested in that. And over the summer, we'll be planning next year's webinar series, or next, I guess, school year's webinar series. So if you have any ideas or would like to get involved in that, please let us know. So huge thanks to everybody again for all of your participation and questions. And I hope that you have a great evening.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks all.